Eagle Nation, what is up? Welcome on in to A to Z Philly Eagles post game live. The Philadelphia Eagles take down the New York Giants 22-16 in week 18. The Philadelphia Eagles wrap it up. They clinch the number one seed. They will have a first round bye. They have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. It was not pretty. It was not perfect. Jalen Hurts struggled a bit. The game planning was off, but nonetheless, the Eagles get it done, and they will be watching next week to see what happens. It took a lot, man. I mean, nobody thought that it would come down to maybe the final quarter, maybe the final possessions of week 18, but the Eagles do pull through. Once again, RB here. Welcome on in to A to Z Philly Eagles post game live. We will get into this game, but obviously we'll talk about the playoff picture, what is happening around the NFL, as I believe the last I saw, the Dallas Cowboys were down 26-6. So maybe it wouldn't have even mattered anyway. The 49ers took a huge gap on the Cardinals. They are blowing them out at this point. We'll get into all of it, what it means here on this postgame show. But we need to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles because I think it's safe to say that Eagle fans will be on both sides of the spectrum after this game. So obviously, everyone is happy the Eagles finally clinched that number one seed. First time that they are the number one seed since 2017. And we remember what happened at that point. The Eagles getting ready to hopefully get healthy and go on another big playoff run. But I think on the other side of it as well, although people are finally, relieved that this is done with, right? The Eagles still are not playing their best football heading into the postseason, which can probably be said for a lot of teams right now. And there are some reasons for that. How much stock can Eagles fans put into today's game? Can we really be frustrated that the Eagles took it down to the wire against Davis Webb and the Giants? Were the Eagles really showing a lot of their hand in this game? Or were they just trying to give a big blow early on and get it through, to try to get the backups in, which obviously did not happen. That kind of sucks. But nonetheless, the Eagles had the number one seed, and that is something to be happy about. And it is good to have that bye week for sure. We'll get the chat involved. Definitely want to gauge the thoughts of Eagles fans. How are we feeling? How confident on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being the most confident and 1 being the least confident, are Eagles fans as they head into the playoffs? We got Jamie up in the chat. Jamie says, need better play calling in the red zone. We have James who says, let's make a Super Bowl run. Jay, what's going on? Renee up in here says, great job, guys. Edith says, yay, Eagles. Georgia says, at least the Cowboys lost. I have some things to say about the Dallas Cowboys as we get later on into the show. We talk about the playoff picture because, again, there's not much to say about this Eagles game. There are some things I do want to hit on, though, that I'm a little bit frustrated with, if I'm being quite honest. But how confident are Eagles fans? Like I said, 1 to 10, 10 being the most confident, 1 being not confident at all as they head into the playoffs. Mr. Roddy Poo in the chat says Shane Steichen is an idiot. Merrifield says F the Cowboys bleed green. Jamie says my biggest fear is San Fran. They are scary. I do have to be honest. Brock Purdy, even though I think coming to the link for a potential NFC championship game would be something that kid has never seen before, he has definitely played up to par, and he's been impressive. He's done exactly what the Niners have needed him to do. And the Niners of all teams are probably the most scary in terms of an opponent right now. We have John in the chat who says 5. Merrifield says 10. We did not want to show our hand. Hay says yes. Nephew Graham. Roddy says no confidence in Shane or Nick. Sean says 10. Let's see. Roddy says 5. Dylan says 8. Deanna says 9. Wardell says bye week can help to work on some things. Jamie says relief is one word. Drop one word or a couple words in the chat to describe how you're feeling after this Eagles win. Dixie says 5. Alonzo says 5. So it seems like a lot of people are right in the middle of this. And again, I think it kind of just goes to speak on how Eagles fans feel at the fact that it took down to the last quarter, down to the last couple possessions to beat the Giants backups. But there are a few things I think in terms of translating to the playoffs that the Eagles really need to self-reflect on. They need to look at, and we're about to get into what those things are. Juan says 9. Deborah says, I'm loving my Eagles, and a 7. Jamie says 8. All right, so I want to talk about this game. First and foremost, Jalen Hurts comes back. He goes 20 for 35 with 229 yards, no touchdowns, and an interception. To be fair, I think Jalen Hurts thought that that interception play was going to be a flag on the Giants. It almost looked like he thought he had a free play because Jalen Hurts does not usually make those throws. That was not characteristic of a Jalen Hurts-esque throw. Throws it right into the end zone, picked off. And I think he thought he had a free play. Overall, Jalen Hurts did not look as sharp as he usually does, but it is going to take some time to get him back in the swing of things. Now, in terms of the play calling, not to hone in on the same thing here, but I just thought it was horrendous. I thought it was bad. I thought that the Eagles coaching staff should have done a better job getting Jalen Hurts more comfortable, but not throwing the entire burden on him early in this game. It's weird. The Eagles went pass first for a lot of this first quarter, a lot of the second quarter. Then they started to go and run the ball. They ran it, 10 out of 13 plays or whatever it was. They started to rack up those carries. And when we sat here at halftime, we said, yeah, it's a pretty balanced offense. But then in the third quarter, it seemed like Shane Steichen tried to get Jalen Hurts to deliver the game-winning blow very early on in that third quarter. It seemed like the Eagles were trying to push. They were trying to push, go and get that extra score so that they could take Jalen Hurts and some of the other starters out of this game. But that did not end up happening because they were trying to force the issue, and it just was not clean. And, Jalen Hurts took a couple sacks. I mean, he was sliding. It seemed like he was being pretty cautionary with his body. But overall, that's not how the Eagles play. That's not how the Eagles play, especially when you have all of these weapons. It seemed like they were trying to do a little bit too much, and it just didn't pan out. Now, I do want to say, um, as we got to the fourth quarter, it seemed like the Eagles were just trying to run out the clock, right? They went on a really nice drive in the fourth quarter. It was almost a 7-minute drive, 71 yards, 15 plays, ends with a Jake Elliott 22-yard field goal. That's how they needed to play. They needed to run the clock out. They had a lot of Boston Scott touches. They had a lot of Kenny Gainwell touches, just running that clock down, right? Running that clock down. And it was a little bit scary when the Giants marched down the field. Davis Webb ends up running in for a 14-yard touchdown. They don't get the 2-point conversion, but at that point, it's a 10-point game. It could have been a one-possession game if they had gotten that 2-point conversion, but the Eagles defense held tight. I thought the Eagles defense did a pretty solid job today, and I thought the Eagles could have just smoothed their way into this win a little bit better. And, obviously everyone wishes that the starters would have been pulled in the fourth, but that just didn't happen because the Eagles did not have as big of a lead. The thing that really got me, though, was the lack of utilization with Miles Sanders. And it's something that I've continued to say and will continue to say. Now, maybe, Boston Scott is the giant killer, and the Eagles thought, okay, we're going to kind of just switch things up here and let Boston Scott take charge and go out there and dominate, which he did. Our leading rusher today, 9 carries, 54 yards, and a touchdown out of Boston Scott. There's just something to be said about how dominant Boston Scott is against the New York Giants. It's just all worldly. It's just a different level. But I just cannot simply understand why Miles Sanders continues to get neglected in the offense. I don't understand why your 1,000-yard rusher didn't get a touch in the fourth quarter. I don't know if he got a touch in the third quarter. He may have got one early on. He had a dropped pass. And yes, he wasn't on his sharpest cuts today. He wasn't really, gaining a lot of yards, hitting that gap well. But, Miles Sanders is a quality running back. He's a quality weapon on this team. And as you get into the playoffs, we know the Eagles' identity will be to dominate in the air. That's how they want to win games. But Miles Sanders is going to be key to winning a playoff game, especially if you're up late and you want to run some of the clock out, or maybe the opposing defense has taken Jalen Hurts out or taken a few things away. Maybe Jalen Hurts can't run as much as we hope he can. And Miles Sanders is going to have to be used. So I just don't understand why he continues to get neglected in the offense. And I hope we see more. I hope we see more. Miles Sanders, 11 carries a day, 33 yards. It seems like the last 3 or 4 weeks, Miles Sanders has essentially been taken out of the offense at certain points, and that just can't happen going forward. So I hope the Eagles offense creates a better balance, especially early in games as they move forward here. But nonetheless, I thought the Eagles defense stepped up big. And I do want to highlight before we get more on the defense, AJ Brown had a monster game, 4 catches, 95 yards, had 2 of those catches in the first couple drives. Devontae Smith, 67 yards on 7 catches, and Dallas Goedert with 6 catches, 46 yards. There's no denying the Eagles have weapons on the outside. They just need to use everybody. And you're going up against a Giants defense who they're just playing laid back. The Giants already have their seed locked up. They're already comfortable. They know that they're going into the playoffs, and now they're going to be playing the Minnesota Vikings. So that should be an interesting matchup. But how do the Eagles fans feel after this game? Are you worried at all? Are you concerned about the last couple weeks? Because there is something to be said about momentum heading into the playoffs, right? There's something to be said. Now, it's not an always type of thing. It's not 100% of the time thing, but the Eagles want to be hitting on all cylinders as they get into the playoffs. And now you have a week, 2 weeks to actually go back and reevaluate everything and make sure you come out with the best possible game plan against whoever you will be going up against. Rick Bennett in the chat says a win, a go through the motions type of win. Jeff says very vanilla defense, only 2 sacks. Yeah, and it was unfortunate that the Philadelphia Eagles could not surpass that sack record. They only had 2. I believe it was 2 or 3 because they had a couple weird sacks, a couple weird plays in this game. The Giants, instead of kicking that field goal early on, try to fake. That didn't work out. They tried an onside kick to start the second half. That didn't work out. There were a lot of weird plays in this game that you don't usually see. And those were the plays where the Eagles were actually accumulating sacks. They could not get to Davis Webb because, I thought there should have been more pressure, obviously, but Davis Webb did get the ball out pretty quick. For a guy that never started a game, I thought Davis Webb was okay. I mean, you could see the guy's not a, long-term player, a long-term starter, anything like that, but he was at least trying to get the ball out with the lack of weapons he had. And that last throw that he made to Kenny Golladay, who, by the way, had his first touchdown as a New York Giant after 2 years, that was a nice catch. But how did Darius Slay let that up? Darius Slay has been not himself over the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 weeks. We're going to need the top version of Slay because when he's at his peak, he's one of the best cornerbacks in the league. The Eagles will need top tier Darius Slay come playoff time. James Bradbury, CJ Gardner-Johnson was back in the mix today. It was good to see him get back in the action, had a couple nice tackles. But overall, the Philadelphia Eagles just kind of took their foot off the gas and, they tried to play it safe later on in the game. They tried to play it safe after trying to just go for it all, in the first 4 or 5 possessions. But I don't know. It was not the way to try to win this game, especially with Jalen Hurts coming off of a shoulder injury. You have to be careful. I mean, coming out and throwing the ball 10 times to begin the game is not really that smart. And over the last 3 weeks, this Eagles offensive coaching staff has really not put together quality game plans. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see, if they can come out and kind of correct some of the issues. Let's see. Jason says, we looked like crap and we'll go into the playoffs cold. Not the way to be. Merrifield says, Boston Scott is a beast. I love Boston Scott. I think Boston Scott is such a quality player. Reminds me of Darren Sproles. And, obviously I wish there were more touches for him, but that's just not possible. They won't even give Miles Sanders touches. I don't think Miles Sanders touched the ball in the fourth quarter, which does not make any sense to me. It does not make any sense because Shane Steichen was asked this week about Miles Sanders, and he essentially said, Miles is our guy. He's a 1,000-yard rusher, but we want to get other guys in the mix. I just don't understand. Miles Sanders has to be used, and this has been an issue for years. Miles Sanders can do a lot of different things on the field. Yes, he had a fumbling issue before and in prior years. He wasn't always as sharp, to hit those certain runs and those certain cuts, and he wasn't always going north to south. But this year, Miles Sanders has even transformed into a much better back, and you just have to let him go, man. You can't get him out of his rhythm come playoff time. The guy was rolling for about 6, 7 weeks. And now the last couple weeks, he doesn't really know what to expect in terms of touches. You can't go out in a playoff game and not let him, feel like, okay, I'm going to get into my rhythm and be able to impact this football game. So we shall see how that goes. But yeah, Shane Steichen needs to put together a concrete game plan, and it can't involve throwing the ball 10 times to begin the game. That's just not going to work in a playoff game. Jeff says, how about them Cowboys? Wants his number one defense. Eagles swaps his save them for the playoffs. Barber says Cowboys suck. Did they officially lose? Let's go ahead and see. Let's go ahead and check here on the scoreboard. Did they officially lose now? I'm sure they did. But yeah, I was watching some of that game. Dak Prescott was 13 for 34 at one point. I don't think I've ever seen a quarterback going up against some backups go 13 for 34. I don't think I've ever seen that. Yeah, they lost 26-6. So you could say the same thing about the Cowboys. I mean, they're not going into the playoffs feeling good. And I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting, man. 13. I want to see what he finished with, actually. I want to see what he finished with. 14 for 37. Could you imagine the narratives that would be put out there if Jalen Hurts went 14 for 37? Could you imagine? I mean, that's bad. Not even bad. That's bad. That is bad, man. But my gosh. Couple other things. I thought the Eagles had a couple tackling issues in this game later on. They were letting the Giants kind of extend, some of those drives by, a third and short. They had the guy stopped in his tracks. For example, TJ Edwards misses a tackle. Guy reaches over. TJ Edwards also had a unsportsmanlike in this game. Eagles linebacker play has to be sharp come playoff time. Teams will try to target that for sure in terms of game planning. Let's see. John in the chat says Eagles did not look like a playoff team against backups and third stringers. They had to sweat out a win. And yeah, I think it's very interesting. You're going to get Eagles fans on both sides for these next couple weeks. And obviously they're not playing next week. So in a couple weeks, there's going to be a lot of different opinions. Can the Eagles kind of shake off some of the rust and come out and look as dominant as they did, for 14 weeks of the season? Now you have Jalen Hurts back. The rest of the team believes in Jalen Hurts. That's their leader, right? So bringing him back into the mix and trying to get him in his rhythm is a good thing. Now, personally, I don't think he should be throwing the ball 35 times in this game. But then again, the Eagles' identity, and I keep going back to it, is that they want to throw. They want to get as big of a lead as possible and then try to run the clock out. And for example, with a game like today, you're going up against third stringers, so it didn't cost you. But if you go up against a better team and you try to throw, and it doesn't work, you have to be ready to incorporate your backs and get another element of the offense going, right? You can't always be bailed out by a third stringer, or a couple third stringers or a backups team, right? Like you have to be ready to attack, and you have to hope that your passing game is going to be as lethal as you think it is in terms of the game planning. Merrifield says they would say many things and they will still praise Dak like he's something. Yeah, exactly. I mean, at this point, it's very obvious to me. It's very obvious. And now the Dallas Cowboys go on the road next week. So let's talk about more of this playoff picture. I want to ask the chat, and shout out to everyone who is watching right now live. Hit that like button if you are watching this, and subscribe on YouTube to A to Z Philly as we continue to grow. I want to ask the chat, who are you most worried about here in the playoffs? For the people that are confident in the Eagles, like who do you look at as, man, that's going to be a tough game? Because right now the 49ers, they're up, they won 38-13. The Niners have been able to accumulate offense, and obviously they have a rock-solid defense. They have Christian McCaffrey. They've been a really, really sound team since acquiring McCaffrey. And when I look at the 49ers, yeah, I think that would be a pretty good matchup. That's thinking down the road in a potential, say, NFC championship game. But yeah, I do think the 49ers would pose a pretty good threat to the Philadelphia Eagles because they could try to control the clock. And I think that's really, really a big element here. Again, if the Eagles try to throw and exhaust that method, and it's not working, the Niners, they go up a score or two. They're going to try to run out the clock and play defense like they know how to. So I think the Niners are definitely a team to keep your eye on. But now we look at the playoff picture, and I want to see if somebody has the official playoff picture because I know the Packers and the Lions are going to be playing. And right now, the Seahawks, I believe, are in overtime. So we're still waiting to see how that game plays out. Let's check if that game concluded yet. So the Seahawks did win. They kicked the field goal in overtime against the Rams. So let's go ahead and find the updated playoff picture here. And by the way, the Eagles do have the 10th overall draft pick because the New Orleans Saints lost today. That's another huge thing. Imagine the Eagles going on a deep playoff run and still getting the 10th overall pick. That would be nuts. Okay, so here is the playoff picture with update with the playoff picture after the Seahawks beat the Rams in overtime. So the Philadelphia Eagles will have the 1 seed, obviously, after winning today's game. They lock up the number 1 seed, which is huge, obviously. The number 2 seed will be the San Francisco 49ers. They will play against either the Green Bay Packers or the Seattle Seahawks. Right now, the Seahawks won their game. They took care of business. If Green Bay beats Detroit, Green Bay is in. They will be the 7 seed. If Green Bay does not win, Seattle will be in as the 7 seed. So it'll either be Niners, Packers, or Niners, Seahawks. Then you look at the 3 seed. The Minnesota Vikings will go up against the New York Giants. What do you think about that game? Could the Giants potentially pull an upset against Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings? I wouldn't put it past them. I wouldn't put it so far past them. And then you have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the 4 seed and Dallas at the 5 seed. And you know what? I'm going to go out on a limb here. I know it's early. I know the week hasn't even started yet. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to beat the Dallas Cowboys. That's what I really think. I think it's going to be a tight game. I don't think Dak Prescott will play as bad as he did today. I don't think the Cowboys will play as a whole as bad as they did. But the Cowboys have definitely been getting away with sneaking past lower tier quarterbacks, backups, and I think it's going to be a tight game. And I am not going to put it past Tom Brady to go on a late game drive and take out the Cowboys. This game is not in Dallas. This is in Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has a losing record. I know they're one of the worst division winners ever, but I honestly think with the way Dallas has been playing, the Buccaneers are going to give them a good fight. And I could see Tom Brady winning it at home in a fourth quarter drive. I mean, that's just what I honestly think. It's not to just hate on Dallas. I really think Tom Brady is going to step it up a notch in the playoffs. So we'll see about that. And who knows with the Vikings and Giants? I would probably favor the Vikings at this point, but that could be a close game as well. And even if Green Bay was to get in tonight against the Niners, Aaron Rodgers and the Niners have had some pretty historical matchups over the last 8 to 10 years. So I wouldn't put that completely past the Niners. Obviously, they would be favored heavily, but you never know. You never, ever know. So I think it's shaping up to be a pretty good playoff picture, a pretty good playoff race. 3 teams from the NFC East will be in the playoffs. It'll be the Eagles, obviously, as the 1 seed, the Cowboys as the 5 seed, and the Giants as the 6 seed. It's weird because the Giants actually had a bye week this week, essentially resting all their players. Meanwhile, every other team had to play for something, which you don't really see. It'll be interesting. Barbara says, you guys are the best. Go Eagles, fly, Eagles, fly. Pete says, let's just see if another NFC team can see what you see and cook the birds in 2 weeks. Anita says, fly, Eagles, fly. I think the Eagles are going to take a good amount of time here to really step back and create the best playbook possible going into the playoffs. This is kind of what happened in 2017. Going into the playoffs, it was a little bit shaky. Doug Peterson took a step back, obviously complete different situation, but he really took time to cater the playbook around Nick Foles, right? He designed a lot of RPOs. He did a lot of things that were helping out the Eagles offense that they hadn't previously, implemented, that they weren't really sharp on before heading into the playoffs. And Frank Reich was a big architect within that project as well. And yeah, I think they're going to get back to doing what they do best. I think they have to. I think if they look at the last couple of weeks, you see it does not work the way you are trying to go out and win games right now. Get back to what you were doing the first 12, 13, 14 weeks of the season. Obviously, you can come out and try to win in the air. And if it works, perfect, right? You go up big and you let your defense help you out and win games. But, you will need to utilize your running backs at some point. Jalen Hurts, I don't think, will just slice through every defense. And I don't think, the Eagles are going to win playoff games by 20, 30 points. So you're going to have to find a way to create that balance. And Shane Steichen can do it. He can do it. He did it for the entire season. And I would expect him to do so now that he has some time to kind of scan things out and see how it'll go. Um, the Eagles actually ran the ball 135 yards today, 207 yards in the air, almost 5 yards per play. And the Eagles ended up winning the time of possession by a few minutes, but this one was a little too close for comfort. It was a little too close for comfort. It's not a game that anybody will remember or care about in a few weeks, but the fact that it had to come down to the last couple possessions is a little bit frightening. It is a little bit frightening. A lot of people will say that the Eagles were just not revealing their hand. They were playing a very vanilla game plan today. And, they weren't throwing a lot out there. We didn't see a lot of pre-snap motion. We didn't really see a lot. They were just kind of going through the motions, like Rick said earlier in the chat. So it'll be interesting. But some of the teams that people are a little bit afraid of, Suave says Tampa Bay. It's an interesting one. That is an interesting one. Um, who else are we afraid of? Who else do we think could pose an interesting matchup to the Philadelphia Eagles come playoff time? I think the Niners are definitely up there. Um, and as the Eagles get ready to embark on an interesting playoff journey, I mean, it is important to appreciate each moment, right? The Eagles had a tremendous season. Obviously, that'll be all for naught if they don't go far in the playoffs. This has to be the year, right? Before you go and pay Jalen Hurts, this has to be the moment. This has to be that stretch, where you have everybody right now. It's a lot of guys on discount deals. We can look at, the entire team. We'll do that more this week. But man, Hassan Reddick finishes the year with 17 sacks. Javon Hargrave, I think, had 12 sacks. Fletcher Cox had a pretty decent year. Brandon Graham, coming off the second unit, had a monster year. I mean, it was a huge year for a lot of guys. James Bradbury resurrected his career. That tandem of him and Darius Slay for most of the season was unreal. How about CJ Gardner-Johnson, a guy you acquire a few days before the season? He was leading the league in interceptions before getting injured. A lot of guys stepped up, and before you have to make decisions on who you pay, this has to be the stretch where you go and take that next step. Because last year, the Eagles got to the playoffs. They weren't ready, though, right? It was kind of that welcome moment. They went and played Brady on the road, and Brady did his thing. Jalen Hurts wasn't ready. But now you're looked at as the MVP candidate quarterback. I don't know if he'll win it after missing a couple games, but now Jalen Hurts is looked at like that guy. He's that guy that needs to come out and lead this team to a couple playoff wins and hopefully to a Super Bowl. And right now they have a really skilled team. And by looking at the rest of the NFC, obviously any given Sunday applies at all times, right? But the Eagles have a dominant roster. And if they get back to playing how they did for most of this season, they should be able to go on a deep playoff run here. So it'll surely be interesting. Not the way you want to really go in the playoffs, not the way you want to set the tone, but having that chance to reset the next couple weeks, I think will be huge for this team. Once again, A.J. Brown sets the Eagles single season franchise record today for most receiving yards in an Eagles season. Almost had 100 today, but he breaks Mike Quick's record. And Devontae Smith breaks the Eagles single season franchise record for most catches in a season. Miles Sanders, 1,000 yards plus, first guy since 2014. There were just so many records shattered. And this was a special Eagles season. Obviously, one of the best in franchise history. But like I said, the Eagles have been to many, many playoffs. They need to go deep. This is a team that can really make their mark. They can really, really be remembered if they get healthy and if they go on a deep playoff run. So it should be interesting to see. Shout out to everyone in the chat. Fear of the Beard says, I'm glad we got that one seed. Jalen looked protective today. I agree. I agree. It didn't seem like the Eagles wanted to throw everything out there today. It didn't seem like Jalen Hurts was willing to extend some of those runs. And that's perfectly normal. And I am perfectly fine with that. You have to protect your quarterback. I do think that brings up one interesting question, though. Will Jalen Hurts be, without limits in the playoffs? Will he be instructed to not try to run as much, or will they let him go off the leash and really just play his game, even if it puts him at the risk of a further injury? How healthy is the shoulder? I think that's a huge question. I mean, again, he missed a couple throws today, a couple that he might usually hit, a couple downfield, but he looked okay. He didn't look completely off filter. And I think it'll be interesting going into the playoffs. I think it'll be an interesting question. Will Jalen Hurts be allowed to, play, freely? Will he be able to run around the field and do some of the things that really helped elevate him to being an MVP level quarterback this year? I mean, the guy came up one rushing touchdown short of the all-time record from Cam Newton. And I know the guy wants to win. I know he wants to win. You know how I know he wants to win? The Eagles played conservative today for the first time in maybe all season, right? There were fourth downs. Usually Nick Sirianni would punch it in and say, let's go for it. He was bringing the punt unit on a lot today. He was just trying to play safe and conservative. And there was one fourth down where the punt unit was coming on the field and Jalen Hurts said, no, get off. No, we're going for it. Nick Sirianni ended up pulling him off the field, but Jalen just wants to go for it. He wants it bad. He wants it bad. And to be quite honest, I think most Eagles fans believe in him now. But will the coaching staff put together a solid, constructive game plan as we get into the playoffs? I think it'll be interesting. So the Eagles will end up playing the lowest seed remaining, I believe. And again, when we look at the playoff picture, I mean, who knows if Green Bay gets in, goes up against the Niners, it'll be a tough matchup. I think the Niners should end up pulling it out, but you never know. But really, say the Giants end up beating Minnesota. You could potentially see an Eagles Giants second round playoff game. And man, I mean, it feels so attainable this year. It feels attainable if the Eagles can just get back to doing what makes them special. This can be a run. This can definitely be a run. Merrifield says he will do whatever it takes to win, no matter what anyone says. Exactly. Jalen wants to win at all costs. Raheem says we run the NFC. I love it. Eagles are on top, man. And even if the Eagles are underdogs, I mean, the Philadelphia Eagles have, they've gone through some ups and downs the last couple of weeks. They're not phased, though. They will come prepared, and I believe they will come ready in terms of a mindset. And I think Jalen Hurts will lead, and I think Nick Sirianni is a coach that these guys want to run through a wall for. I do. I think Nick commands that locker room, and I think he will have the guys ready to go. And now going through that experience last year of getting smacked in the first playoff game, I think the Eagles will be much more prepared. These guys have now seen it together, and I think they will, be much more ready to go. I do want to give one more shout out today to Jake Elliott. 5 for 5. He went. Couple big kicks there, a couple 50-plus yarders. Let's see. I wrote it down. It was the last one I think was the deepest. Or no, he had the 22-yarder, but before that, he had a 54-yarder that just went through. He had a 39-yarder. He had a 52-yarder. Jake Elliott was huge, 32. It is very nice. And sometimes I feel like it goes under the radar of how amazing it is to have a kicker like Jake Elliott. Most of the time when Jake Elliott's back and getting ready to kick one, I mean, for the most part, you're confident that it's going in. For the most part, you're confident that Jake Elliott is going to send it through the uprights. And that can be huge come playoff time. That can be huge. There are playoff games where you can't really punch one in, tight red zone defense, and you have to rely on your kicker to kick 3 or 4 in a playoff game. And I'm confident in Jake Elliott. I thought he was fantastic today, and it's good to see him get some of those reps. 16 points accounted for today by Jake Elliott. That is huge. Um, but yeah, overall, before we get out of here, once again, shout out to everyone who is in here. We're live every halftime and post game for the Eagles, and we drop videos and stuff as well. So if you have not yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button and like this stream. You know, it's crazy to think about where the Eagles are at. Just kind of bringing all this together as we wrap up the regular season. Obviously, a lot of football to go, but it's really interesting to think about where this team is at. You go back a couple years, the Eagles were going through the Carson Wentz disaster. They were going through the finale of Doug Peterson, the way that thing ended. And then, after winning that Super Bowl, after being on the highest of the highs, feeling like this team was headed in the complete other direction. And for someone who has personally been hard on Howie Roseman, I just have to say, first off, he should be executive of the year. I don't have any doubt in my mind about that. But man, what a job. What a job bringing in Nick Sirianni, a guy who, went to his first press conference at the podium and was made fun of. People didn't like him from that moment because he couldn't speak fluently. And just seeing the way he has turned this franchise around, how Howie Roseman, how Jeff Lurie have turned this franchise around in a couple years. Now they're the number 1 seed and ready to embark on another deep playoff journey. It's insane, man. It's special. And I think not only does this set the precedent for this year, but going forward as well, the Eagles have built a very good foundation, and they have a top 10 draft pick this year, and they'll have another draft pick. And, they're just loading up for years to come, but this is a huge way to start it. You go out, and some of the moves that you made this past offseason have paid huge dividends, moves that maybe at the time weren't thought to be top tier moves around the league. But AJ Brown obviously was a big trade, but James Bradbury, picking him up after he gets cut by the New York Giants. Hassan Reddick, who's been on 3 teams in 3 years, picking these guys up has just been, it's been insane. And it has paid dividends. And there's a lot more to come. 2 receivers over 1,000 yards. Dallas Goedert might have had over 1,000 yards if he did not get hurt. Miles Sanders over 1,000 yards. Jalen Hurts setting all type of records. And the Eagles finish at 14-3, tied for the best record in the league, number 1 seed. And now they will wait to see who their opponent is. We will be breaking it down over the next 2 weeks, so be sure to stay tuned in. The Eagles get it done. Not pretty, not perfect, as it has not been the last couple weeks, but now they have time to reset, refresh, and get their minds right to go on what will hopefully be another miracle. So we shall see how it plays out. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Eagles get the job done today, 22-16, and they will move on as the number 1 seed. Bye week next week, home field wrapped up. Now they look to get healthy and get prepared. Thank you all for tuning in. This is A to Z Philly Eagles post game live. Hit that like button, subscribe to the show, and as always, I will catch you all on the next one. Peace.